Let's review Matrix Resurrections. If the newest Matrix felt like a nostalgia-baited cash grab, it's because, well, it was. It's like a flashback episode of a sitcom where they play all the fan favorite clips, but instead this time they redid them and made them worse to appeal to people who never saw or cared for the original show. The most egregious example of this is, amazingly, the fight scenes, which were fun and amazing in The Matrix, and yet here have no weight to them. And it looks like everyone's pulling their punches and dancing. Even ignoring the very accommodating stuntman problem with the 90-pound blue-haired hero, the fighting is just terrible to watch. The story's no better. It's basically that Neo is back in the Matrix, having been resurrected by the machines, the analysts specifically, and he's woken up and rescued, again, by a ragtag team of humans and their new bot allies. Neo's been having dreams about Trinity, and the programs have convinced him, by using a prescription of endless blue pills, that the Matrix was a video game trilogy he created. Upon being rescued, he realizes he needs to also rescue Trinity, and Matrixy stuff ensues on the quest to do just that. One of the biggest problems, though, is that the effects look worse. And this is the hallmark of modern cinema, relying on cheaper alternatives to practical effects without using the correct tools to make it look as good. This is The Matrix as homage to The Matrix, so anything special to justify its existence. And don't mistake me, I understand that some nostalgia bait is fun, but when done poorly, it just leaves a bad taste that even the tastiest theater popcorn and pop can't wash out. I'll give you a good example of where a good idea was just left to rot on the vine. The Merovingian from the sequels and other rogue programs came back in this film. At first, I was momentarily excited because they were the most interesting and most underused part of the fairly terrible sequels. Vampires, ghosts, and werewolves, oh my! Yet in this film, we get a rambling crazy man in the form of Hobo Merovingian screaming incoherently while a bunch of rejects from a made-for-TV Mad Max clone run around with caveman sticks and staffs and knives and yet somehow hold their own in a gunfight. Somebody forgot to watch The Untouchables before filming this scene. Or the older Matrix movies. To make it worse, there were no ghosts phasing out, no cool vampires or werewolves laying the smackdown, nothing that made you remember why these characters, the rogue programs, were cool in the first place. Just a lame fight scene that had you added some neon could have been directed by Joel Schumacher in the late 90s. It was uninspired at best and an insult to the fans at worst. The main characters fare no better than this fight scene. Neo's power levels are all over the place, lacking any logic or consistency. He can't fly or control the Matrix really anymore, but he can kind of use bullet time, and he can mostly stop bullets and missiles. At the end, Trinity is somehow also the one, or I guess part of the two now. She can fly and control anything because something equality or the power of love, I suppose. They pulled a Mary Poppins Princess Leia from The Last Jedi here, and it plays out just as poorly. Also, the entire mythos and ability to see and manipulate the code is glossed over, just like the entire premise of a real story. And there's also a weird reverse bullet time created by the analyst, played by Neil Patrick Harris, who can rewind, loop, and stop Neo and anybody else unless Trinity wakes up and gets close to Neo, at which time an energy explosion happens that somehow, some way negates the analyst's power and gives them a boost to their plot armor? We also need to talk about Agent Smith. He's immune to the analyst's upgraded Matrix because something reasons, and his dealing with the analyst was amazingly anticlimactic and pointless, to say the least. Considering his previous arc and importance in the Matrix mythos up to this point, here the entire Agent Smith arc can be removed from the plot and it wouldn't even matter. Let me rephrase that. Agent Smith was in the movie but had no reason to be in the movie, which just seems weird to say out loud. Sati from the original trilogy is back as well, only she sometimes appears in the form of what looks like a stealth bird, which seems like handy tech that neither side otherwise has or uses, so that's also weird. You'd think that stealth tech in the real would be super handy in a war. Oh well. One special effect fake out is all we get, because to make it make sense would require a story, and we're not really doing that here in this cash grab. As for other throwaway characters you didn't care if they returned or not, it's 60 years into the future, so really only Niobe is still around, and she has the worst security protocols for a city she hides and controls. She jails Neo for wanting to save Trinity and thereby risking this new but not new Zion. But of course, Neo escapes with the help of our main new crew as if it isn't a thing. He just sort of steps off onto the ship off of his balcony with the help of the new robot Morpheus and flies off to continue the journey to save Trinity. The entire side quest of him being imprisoned was just a waste, and like Agent Smith, you could remove it and Niobe from this movie and it wouldn't matter. This escape is extra dumb because Niobe told the crew in question's captain to transfer over her captaining credentials. And you'd think this wouldn't have been an, oh, follow this order when you get a chance, dearie, type of order, considering Niobe was quite pissed and demanded it in the same scene that Neo got thrown into his not really a jail cell. Again, worst security protocols imaginable. Don't get your hopes up when I said Morpheus, because a new Morpheus, but not really Morpheus, but also part Agent Smith, but clearly not Agent Smith because we have another Agent Smith, is as confusing as that just sounded. He mostly exists to have a weak, I still know Kung Fu moment with Neo, and to fly into the Death Star's, super secret pod room's ventilation shaft, where alive again Trinity is being held by the machines post-resurrection. The team breaks in with some robot help to grab Trinity, and then there's some pretty jarring cutscenes where they escape the pod room, somehow, despite the analyst locking it down and sending in a swarm of drones. There's another jarring fight/cutscene where the captains inside the Matrix are surrounded by bots, really just people who are turned into a swarm, because that's a thing now, and Trinity, who 2 seconds ago was standing with Neo, is now saving him by running over said bots with a motorcycle. There's another scene later where they're all surrounded, and one cutaway later, they're all in cars in a chase scene. It's really weird watching a nearly 3-hour movie and feeling like the transitions were cut for time so they could shove more of the repetitive and weak dialogue into the film. Ultimately, this movie tries to be a love story and a resurrection story and, but mostly is just boring. The director tried to use a lot of flashy gimmicks from a 20-year-old franchise without really seemingly having a reason to make the film. Well, no obvious reason besides money. Obviously. But that obvious point was hammered home as hard as bloody possible, so you couldn't miss that this was just a cash grab project of necessity. This painfully obvious point was in the form of a very meta line Neo had at the beginning of this movie with who we think is his boss. And that's when he's told that he has to make a new Matrix video game that only had cinematics and no gameplay apparently, as the parent company, Warner Brothers, was going to do it with or without them and nuke their contracts if they said no. And that pretty much explains this whole film. Well, okay, that's not fair. This film is actually best summed up by the fact that the song at the end of the original Matrix from 1999 was Wake Up by Rage Against the Machine. And this time, it's a cover of Wake Up by some band called Brass Against, who was most famous, I kid you not, for performing that song while literally pissing, as in urinating on a fan at a concert about a month before the movie was released. This was a movie that felt forced on every level, didn't have even the semblance of a soul, and only rated a disgusting cover band for the end credits. As much as I don't like to do this, it was shy of even being didn't like it for me, and thus I'm gonna have to say I hated it and give it a 1 out of 5. Cheers. See you after the next show.